This video is about the breeding principle of one of the most important cattle scientists of all time. He's not very much known in Europe, especially not in Germany. So listen in, I think you're going to learn a lot. And the guy I'm talking about is Dr. Jan Bonsma from South Africa. Talking about him with one of the leading Hereford and Angus breeders from North America, with Darius Meitler from Kansas, USA. Darius, it's a pleasure to talk to you.
Well, thank you for having me on. I hope to have some great conversation and maybe give some education on the Bonsma principles, and if nothing else, tell you a little bit how it's affected our ranch and our history and some of the great benefits it's given us.
Yes, sounds great. So for people to know, why should they listen? What's in it for them? Why should they listen to that? Why is this topic interesting to my viewers and cattlemen in general?
I think basically what a lot of the Bonsma principles and ideas and teachings, the base root of that is just kind of back to basics and maybe working with how nature naturally wants to work a little bit more, being in tune with one's ranch and farm, knowing your environment and finding animals that are fit for those environments and are successful. And there's some of the principles that he talked about of why these animals can be successful. Basic number one, a cow has to have a calf every year. If she's not fertile enough to be bred every year, or is skipping time periods, that costs producers a tremendous amount of money. So fertility, what to look for, what are signs of fertility, and he did a lot of studying with hormones and finding cattle that are hormonally balanced, and how they could be successful, and how those hormones not only affected their body, but showed visual signs of maybe the animals that could be more successful.
I think visual signs is one of the keywords here, because just one example about Bonsma, he could preg check every cow from just looking at them, and that when I read that, it was completely mind-blowing to me. So there he found that some very, very important visual signs to evaluate cattle just by looking at them, without any laboratory testing or anything like that. He could just see it, and I hope we can show you some of those signs today. Quickly about Jan Bonsma, who was this guy?
He studied in South Africa, and then later on came over to the United States, and he went around doing demonstrations. And like you said, my father, Gene Meitler, saw him at Kansas State University in 1966. My dad was in his teenage years. He went with my grandfather and some other producers and went to one of these presentations that he put on. And like you said, he just wowed people in the crowd with his ability to preg check. He would, the university had walked cattle out in front of him. He was able to tell them how many cows or how many calves that each cow had. He told, how many ages, how old she was, how many calves she had, and maybe if she had skipped a lactation or aborted a calf. He could visually see those things. I don't pretend to have those skills, but there are signs to look for, and so many things that I think can be learned from these principles. And just the main overall goal is to people really becoming in tune with their cows and observing them and seeing the fine details that so many people don't take the time to see. So those are some of those things. Another thing that my father learned in one of his demonstrations, he had a lady in the crowd kind of heckling him like, "You can't know. There's no way you can tell this about a cow and tell how many calves." And I guess Dr. Bonsma had asked the lady to come up on stage, and he looked at her and he guessed within 2 years of her age and told her how many children that she had had, and he was correct. And the lady just was wowed and never heckled him again, I guess. So those were some of the things he could do. And my dad spent a lifetime, I guess, taking in, you know, I don't think as a young man he soaked in all what he saw in that presentation, but all the years on the ranch, my dad kept seeing so many of those truths that he had learned through Jan Bonsma's writings, and they kept being proven over and over to be true. And he just found it fascinating. And my dad, in his later years, really enjoyed teaching people some of those truths that he had found out. And I guess part of the reason we started that Facebook page was in memory of my father, but also in memory of Jan Bonsma, and hope to keep some of these ideas alive and passed on to the generations ahead.
So you talked about his lectures. He wrote, I think, 2 books, and the book where he tells all about his work and his approach would be Man Must Measure. And in there he tells why he knows all this stuff, how he got to there. Yeah, tell us, how could he see the signs, and how could he even develop this sharp eye for cattle?
You know, I think a lot of you know, I don't think I can hit every topic today, but a lot of things I think can be found by studying the older successful animals that did on your farm, on your ranch, that were successful and lasted a long time, and maybe studying those and finding out what physical characteristics they had. Jan Bonsma, he really looked at skeletal structure, and a lot of that was and is formed in animals through their hormones, and that a strong puberty takes place in females. The long bone growth shuts off in the front end first and last in the rear end. So a cow, you want them to be wedge shaped. You want them to be feminine in the front and broader in the back. And the opposite is true for a male. Hormones shut off long bone growth first in the rear and last in the front. And so a bull will have that masculine up-fronted look, and actually be wedge shaped from front to back. And if you think about it, it's just pretty natural in nature. In animals, masculine males are up-fronted and females are opposite in their making. And in nature, they have opposite jobs to do, right? I mean, you want the cows to have room and capacity to carry that calf to term, and her job is being a mother. And the male, he doesn't have to worry about that. He needs to fight for dominance, and has physical characteristics that are different. So those are some of the basic things that Bonsma talked about. Is a lot of it's just simple in nature, but in today's world, it seems man messes so many things up and selects against how nature naturally wants to work, and then ends up fighting it.
Why should they select with nature in mind? What's the advantage of that?
You know, I think animals, for so many reasons, he often talked about the slope and hooks to pins. You want some slope from hooks to pins for easy calving. You don't, you know, cattlemen that, you know, you got to have a live calf every year. The cows that don't give you trouble, that don't have problems having calves, they have natural vigor because you know, when they're born, they're ready to, the mother has natural instinct to stand up, to lick that calf, to stimulate them. The calf has natural instinct to stand up and suck colostrum and get going. Those are all vital things that make the rancher money, that just, like I say, people take for granted. And you can have too big of calves or too small of calves that have no vigor and aren't willing to fight for life. So it is that basic. And fertility is, I think, the #1 driving force of profitability in the commercial cattleman. Cattle got to be bred every year. Definite advantage just calving early in the calving season. Have uniform calves to sell at the end. Just so many things.
Yes. And you talked about the shape of bulls and cows. I think that's one of the cornerstones of his breeding principle and his thoughts. What are other important parts of breeding and other cornerstones of his approach?
Some of the things I guess I would talk about in the maternal female that Bonsma teaches is on the front end of a female, you'd like to have a shoulder with some angle in the shoulder, and when they walk, you want that shoulder blade to rotate up over the spine, and it causes a U neck appearance in a cow. And I guess kind of the extreme look of that would be many dairy cows have that look, but very much in the beef industry, not to the extreme, if femininity of a dairy animal, but many of the fertile, productive beef cows will also have that characteristic. He also talked the rib slope in a male versus a female. He wanted the ribs on a cow to sweep backwards toward the hind end of the body, not a straight angle, but slightly sweep. He talked about the advantage of this is a cow, her ribs can flex as she's carrying that calf. She can take on a big forage base. She can breathe easier pregnant because her ribs actually have the ability to flex not only outward but upward. So in the male, hormones cause the ribs to lay more vertically, straight up and down. So I guess those are a couple other things that are talked about. And he also liked the big crest on a bull showing testosterone, and he often talked about the study of puberty, and you would like puberty to have a strong, robust puberty, and the timing of that puberty to, of course, you want the puberty to happen. I don't know if you want it super early, but you don't want it super late. Animals got to get bred. We don't have time in the beef industry to wait 4 years to have a calf, right? They need to get going and produce a calf. And every environment's different, but those are also things that he talked about, and I think can teach a lot of cattlemen a lot of things.
At what age do your cattle reach puberty?
We typically breed our cattle to calve as 2-year-olds, and we expect them to calve in a 60 to 70 day calving window every year. And if they fall out and go to town. We don't give them any reason to keep them. We have a nice uniform set of calves to sell every year. I was just talking to a friend of mine that lives in Texas, and he raises Brahma cattle. And he was telling me down in Costa Rica and different areas, they're struggling with fertility so bad they're only having a calf every 2 to 3 years. And I can't imagine the profit loss that those guys are having. And a lot of that is due to American genetics and show genetics that are just cattle that are heavily muscled and don't have any of these hormonal balance that we're talking about, that are fertile and can have a calf every year.
And they're probably also just from a completely different environment, so not adapted to Costa Rica.
Right. And I think there could be some genetics that are, but these genetics that don't know how to thrive on forage, and maybe live their whole life eating out of a grain pail, and then those, like to your point, those genetics are thrown out into natural forage, and they don't know how to get it done.
Yes. And in the book, he describes his way of evaluating cattle and how he got to those visual signs. And for example, he measured the cattle. He had a research station in South Africa, and he measured over, I think, 3,000 cattle every month. And he took 14 measurements of them. Through that was developed a new breeding system, which I know under the name of linear measurement. Can you tell us a bit more about linear measurement?
Jan Bonsma actually ended up starting the type of cattle, which was a mix of a few different breeds. And, you know, I guess my father and my take, and different people have different takes on some of Bonsma's ideas. He definitely did take those measurements, and I think over time it became, I feel like, and maybe if he was sitting here with us, he could tell us something different, but that those were to gain confidence in what he was seeing with his own eye, by taking those measurements and seeing some of these animals that did have those wedge shape that I was talking about. And he took measurements, and I think was looking for confirmation that what he was seeing with his own eyes, he confirmed those with those measurements. So on our ranch, I can't tell that we take those measurements, but I think we're seeing them visually and selecting for them.
Mm. My understanding of those measurements is that he measured all his animals, then took a look at which animals are the most productive, the best ones, and tried to find out
how they correlated.
Yes, and what combines the best animals, and looked at the measurements to then see which measurements are the best, to then be able to measure smaller cattle, heifers and bulls, to evaluate whether they will be good breeding stock or not, to then precisely predict the performance of those cattle. That's my understanding.
Right.
What do you say about that? So this would be possible for any environment in the world, not only South Africa, to look at which cattle perform best, what combines them, and then select for this common trait.
Right. And I think so much of it, measurements were part of it as well. He also talked about cattle in the springtime slicking off and having a smooth hide and losing that winter hair in the springtime. And we have found that on our place to be, you know, the first heifers in the spring to cycle are those heifers that slick off early. And another visual sign of, you can almost tell which ones are going to be bred up, and the heifer with long shaggy hair late into the spring. Not that she won't breed, but if I had to guess out of a group who was not, oftentimes those are going to be the animals that will not breed in a timely fashion, and if at all. So I personally, we're not huge on the measurements, but that was a big part of his deal. And like I said, I think so much of it was proving what could be seen visually by getting a number on paper and comparing. But I think in the end, and after you've been a part of it for a while, I don't know as if you need to look at a piece of paper, you can just visually look at them.
Yes, so. Yes. That's actually the same thing another breeder from the USA once told me, Kit Pharaoh, that he doesn't take the measurements because he just sees which cattle will be in those measurements. He also said that it's about your eye for cattle, seeing which cattle are best. And I think we, at this point, we really have to underline the fact that the early shedding cattle are usually the best and most adapted to your place. So that's something I've heard of from many farmers to be true. And what's the logic behind that?
I think it's just a sign that they're doing well. And also, like I said, they're, to your point, they are in tune with their environment and their bodies. They're getting what they need. They're healthy. It's just a sign of things being right. And so many of the successful animals do have that characteristic for sure. And in Europe, I'm sure certain areas you need to have some winter hair. And I don't know if some people get confused that they think they have to be slick hided all year long. I mean, these cattle, they can grow some winter hair, but then in the springtime, they need to slick off. Yes. And that's something we found to be true here for sure.
Mm. I think that's the main point, that the haircut of the animal adapts quickly to changes in the weather and climate. So that just shows this animal is adapted to your environment, and that should be your first goal, to have your animals adapted to your environment, because only then they can reach their maximum potential. And if not, they just, you lose all of your potential, which would be like bad.
Right.
In general, you can see a lot of, or most things of the animal on their hair and hide, how their current health status is, how they've been in the past, and so on. And for example, Jan Bonsma also talked about Hairworlds, that there are especially 5 Hairworlds on the animal that will tell you a lot about the animal. Do you use those Hairworlds as indicators?
I think there's definitely some things to be looking at. I would go along with, it seems like a lot of the hormonally cattle that are affected and have hormones working at a healthy rate in their body. The thymus gland on the neck is something that will have a visual. It's pretty easy to see, especially in the summer when they're slicked off. Seems like cattle that are real successful and good producers will have a big thymus gland up on their neck. That's something quick you can look at and see. I know I don't know if it was Bonsma or another, but I think one of Bonsma's back to looking at the hide at the lower part of the belly coming up the side, the hair I think that was one of his indicators to look for pregnancy, as that hair has a upward lift to it, and that you can almost see. It's hard to, some of these things, it's hard without having a visual representation to be pointing at. It's hard to see, I guess. So yeah, I think there are definitely things to look at. Like you said, the hide is telling us something about the animal, the health. There's other indicators of things to be looking at, and just be studying your animals. I think the whole point of Bonsma is to get people to go out and study their animals and look at it and see if they can see it for themselves, and maybe look at their animals at under a little different microscope per se. And I would say study your successful ones on your ranch, on your farm, the ones that have did what you wanted them to do and did it for a long time. My guess is they're going to have a whole bunch of these characteristics that we're talking about. So that's the easiest way to learn. Go spend time with your animals and study them and look at them and study them throughout the year. And I know in this world that we live in, that's a hard thing to do for a lot of people, right? But there's can be a lot to be learned of just being a student to your animals.
Yes. And you said those successful animals who did their job for a long time. So you try to have cattle that that get very old and produce for a very long time.
Right. I think there's also profit in longevity. If your average age of your cow herd, if the average age is 5 and you can push it to they last till 8 when they bring you a good calf, that's less replacement heifers that you're having to keep every year. And since you're keeping less, maybe you can cull harder and keep the very best of the best, and keep improving your herd over time. And it's all about efficiency. I know there's ranchers that their cattle don't have to make money, but mine do. So we want them to be successful and kind of compare them to an employee. You went to all the work and effort to train them. The longer they can stay with you and work for you, and they already know what to do, and they're adapted to your environment. And the less money you got to spend to train new ones, and to keep that replacement heifer for 2 years without any return. I think it's a lot like running a business and looking at them like employees. The more they buy in and work alongside you, the better off you are.
And if they can live longer under your climate conditions, it also tells you that they're more adapted to your place.
Right. Right.
What would you think is the difference between the Bonsma approach and the modern approach? And I don't know, do you know much about European breeding?
I do not, other than some pictures, but not a lot. No.
Okay, yes, yes. So what would you say is the difference between Bonsma and modern North American breeding, and especially, let's say, I wouldn't compare it to commercial limousine or Charolais, but rather to modern Northern American Angus, Hereford breeds like that.
Yeah. So if I was going to compare modern, I think there's going to be some people disagree with me on this, but I think a lot of the industry is getting drove what is good for the packer, what is good for the end producer, but is that what's giving your ranch most profit? Because they want extremes and bigger, taller, wider animals. Is that necessarily what's most profitable for your ranch? Are you giving up fertility? Are you having 20% open females because they're not hormonally balanced and fit for your environment, but they're fit for the packer to have big carcasses hanging? So there, I think mainstream kind of wants to push for extremes, and if finding that perfect niche for the environment and sweet spot on your ranch, maybe those animals may differ. So I think, and not that these animals that are Bonsma type can't hang good carcasses, because they can, but that's where I see the separation is, and not talking about the show ring. There's other things there. A lot of these carcass shows in the United States, I've heard people tell me these calves are so thick that half of them are having to come out C-section to be able to compete in the steer shows. Well, where does that have a fit in the commercial cattle industry if these cattle can't even do it on their own? So I think there is a lot of separation, and like I say, I know some people may not want to talk those points, but everything comes back to basics with Mother Nature, and the more you're trying to fit with her, I think the more profit your ranch will see, and the easier and honestly, the more successful and less problems your cattle can have, and that's from structural issues to some of these animals that they have in the feed yard. Their feet and legs are terrible, and then they want to push them to 1,600 pounds, 1,700 pounds, and you put them on a terrible structure. It's not even humane for the animals, so there's a lot of things that if you give some flex to those joints and some mobility and animals that can move correctly, there's just lots of benefits for everybody. So.
Yes. You talked about show cattle. In August last month, I've been to several shows in Ireland, to several Angus shows, and I've seen many very fleshy cows with calves. What's your take on that? Do you want fleshy cows when they have calves sucking on them?
Oh, I think we want cattle that can maintain some flesh to rebreed. And I think that's fine, but at the same time, can we all afford all those inputs that those show cattle are getting, as in 25 pounds of grain a day? And I'm talking about animals that work on the natural range and can turn land that's not farmable into protein, and that's what a cow does. And I don't know why we need to necessarily supplement and lift her up. I think she ought to be able to do it on her own, and not that all these show cattle can't, But I think we're giving them so many inputs that I don't know if we're seeing what they truly can do on range, and there might be some separation between the commercial cattlemen and what they're doing with them show cattle. That's my opinion.
Yes, yes. I think that's a very good take too, that you shouldn't talk about the fleshiness only, but also how did they get that fleshiness. So obviously the farmers who live from their cattle can't breed only show cattle, but want to have cattle that are show cattle on their normal feed anyways. So they don't have to feed them tons of concentrate to get into show condition, but to have cattle that are in show condition anyways. So I think that's very important to keep in mind when attending shows and looking at the show cattle, to not only look at how do the cows look, but also what were they fed before that. And I was, I don't know if you've heard of them. I worked for the McEnroe brothers, and they didn't really feed much concentrate and just had beautiful cows at the shows. And that's why I was very, very happy to show these cows, because they were just good cows.
Right. Yep. They didn't need a lot of extra. They just got it done.
Yes, yes. And they have to, because those two farmers, the McEnroes, they live from their cattle, and they have to earn the daily bread from their cattle. So they just can't afford to feed them all of their money.
Right. And I think that's a valid point, that people that are buying genetics to add to their herd, that they need to understand, if they are outsourcing them and buying them other places, to understand, back to a lot of Bonsma's talk about environment. Cattle that are propped up on all them inputs, are they going to look like that if you bring them home to your place and they got to get it done on your resources that might not be the same resources of the next guy? So those are all things to consider.
Yes. So when we talk about Bonsma, it's when people see just two guys talking about him, it's, I think, still quite abstract. What would you say are the easiest and most important steps to follow to breed like Bonsma, or to see cattle like Bonsma? So just very practical tips for people.
I think we covered some of those. The early shedding cattle are definitely going to be to fit that line. And I would also say to study your animals that have been successful on your place. And I think you're going to find that the ones that really work fall into some of these categories. The females are going to be angular, feminine looking front ends on them. The males will be testosterone enhanced animals that have masculine fronts and a big crest on them. And that can vary across breed to breed. But at the same time, I think there is a similar look within those animals to easily see that their hormones are actively working. And those animals are going to be more successful and be more profitable for you. And so I would suggest anyone that, our Facebook page, there's some chat throughout the feed on there. You can also go to the files section under the heading. You click on files, and there's some writings of Bonsma on there that are free to view. There's some other cattlemen that are quoted in some of their literature on there. And this next year, we're going to hold an event at our ranch. My dad did a few over the years that are dedicated to the Bonsma thinking, some classroom time, some speakers, and then some also on the ranch, looking at cattle, evaluating cattle, and trying to pick out some of those finer points that Bonsma looked for. Some of those we talked about today.
The Facebook group is actually great for me, because you don't only hear or read things, you actually have pictures of cattle, pictures of cows, calves, and bulls, and people who mostly are extremely good breeders, talk about them, so you can see it and visualize it for yourself. That's I've just by being in this group, I've learned quite a lot about breeding, and I think in general, when you constantly see good cattle, you just naturally get an eye for that, and that's probably the point why you said study your cattle.
Right, right. And it's like you said, there's always you can learn from everybody, and I don't know as if there's a one environment or one marketing situation, or to be honest, one cow that will work everywhere. But I think there is a general overall picture that we're all looking for, and they need to be fit for your environment and profitable and successful. And those animals that last on your place and produce you a good calf every year, and do it without much maintenance or assistance. Those are the ones to learn from. You know, your cows are trying to teach you every day. You just got to stop and listen to them. So.
At that point, I'd like to add two more principles, not from Bonsma, but from a guy who I think studied him very much. That would be Goldfry. He has written the book Reproduction and Animal Health. And in that he states that every single trait selection is doomed to failure. And what he discovered, or what he found out over the years, is that by selecting for the two most important traits, you select for, in general, for every good trait in a cow. And those traits would be high fertility and low maintenance. And that when you have those two traits in a cow, that she will be profitable and economical for you in every way. And that these two traits, high fertility, low maintenance, are the most important ones to look for.
Yes, and I think some of that can be the simple. I'm sure you've heard it, that form follows function. That if we try to visualize what we think a cow should look like, but maybe we go about it the wrong way. Maybe we should find the successful ones, study what they look like, and that's what we're going after. Maybe not what we have built up in our mind.
Yes.
And it is that simple. And then once you got that look down and you know what that is, life becomes easier. And people at the beginning trying to figure some of this out, it sounds like voodoo, witchcraft, crazy stuff. Well, it's not. It's just studying the animals that are successful, and letting them kind of tell you this is what the environment and what the planet wants, and not let your ego go. And we're going with that, right? So
yes. Are there more people that study Bonsma so deeply like Goldfry, or where else could you find information about Bonsma and his techniques?
I think there's more people kind of coming, or a lot of people have heard about Bonsma. This Facebook page has definitely centered up some people and brought people together. I've gotten to know a gentleman that's in Australia now, but he was raised in South Africa, and his grandfather actually worked with Bonsma. So there's a lot of connections being made, and I think some people, of the big ranches of the 1950s and 60s into the 70s across the U.S. I don't know as if they knew who Jan Bonsma were, but they were maybe selecting those type animals just because they were the successful ones. And now we've maybe, I'm not saying there aren't good cattle out there. Obviously there are, but we got so many other noises, and like I said, I think we're trying to raise cattle for the packer and maybe not cattle for our own ranches. That's my opinion. And I think as more problems arise by people have selecting for these terminal type animals, the more they're kind of turning to, hey, how do we fix some of what we've went awry from here? And they're looking for different avenues. And I think that's why there is some resurgence to the ideas of Bonsma. Hey, we got to get back to some basics here and get our cow herds doing what they're meant to do. So
yes. And what I'm also curious about, does the Bonsma approach, like linear measurement, the worlds, and so on, does it apply for dairy cattle?
Yes, I think it applies all across, you know, and I don't have a lot of experience with dairy cattle, but I think there's some animals that milk fat, and there's been some other people that these hormonally correct animals will have higher milk fat and that's why they're raising these better calves, as their milk fat's a little better. And I would go so far as to say animals that are healthy and in tune with your environment and hormonally fit have better natural instincts, probably produce better natural colostrum. You know, the animals are set up for success from the get-go.
Yes.
From the very beginning. And I think the more we learn through science, I think epigenetics and so many things, they're finding out how early some of these successes happen and how early in life why they're successful.
What do you think about cattle breeds? Is there one you specifically prefer that you would recommend to people, or what's your take on it?
On cattle breeds?
Yes.
I think there's probably a place for all the breeds, honestly, and by selecting what works in your environment. Of course, the eared cattle in southern U.S. and down into the New Mexico, obviously there's reasons they work better for they're better at fighting off parasites and insects and you know, so I think there's all the breeds have their place. But I think another point I'd like to make, I think a lot of people narrow up each individual breed is this. Well, enough years of breeding has taken place that I think there are breeds within breeds. I don't think all Angus are the same, and I don't think all Herefords are the same. And you name the breed, people have bred the animals to do different things, and I don't think it's probably fair to the animals to pigeonhole them all as the same thing, you know. So I guess that'd be a point I would make. But.
Yes, I also think every breed has its place, because most of them are originated from a specific place and came from a specific environment, and were then tried to adapt to other parts. For example, the Angus breed, a very popular one, came from Scotland, a very cold and rainy place, and it's now adapted to basically all parts of the world.
Right.
And, I think that's also a sign for good cattle, that they adapt quickly to every kind of environment. For example, I heard about one herd of Red Devon from New Zealand. They were exported to the north of the USA and the south of the USA. So in the north, where it's just extremely cold, and in the south, where it's extremely hot. And they thrived in both climates. And so I think that's a very, very good indicator for just good cattle, that they are able to adapt to any form of environment. And I think with good breeding, you can get that into any cattle breed.
Right. I would agree with that 100%. Yep.
I just interrupted Darius from tagging cars, so some of his cars are still running out there untagged. So I'll let him go now. And if you have any questions about Bonsma, you can write it in the comments, or write it in the Facebook group, or to Darius directly. And yeah, until that, thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too. I hope you could gain some valuable knowledge. I will cut the interview up in pieces so you can find the different parts more easily. And the reason why I'm so impressed by Jan Bonsma is careful measurement. So when he worked at the Mara Research Station in South Africa, he was given the assignment to breed a new breed for Africa. So because the indigenous cattle, the Afrikaner, they didn't perform very well, but they were adapted to the environment. And the British beef breeds weren't adapted to the environment, so had many health problems. So he created a new breed, the Bonsma, and he did that extremely careful. It took more than 3,000 measurements per month. So you could really validate what he was saying, all his opinions and what he found out. And that is what makes him very interesting to me. He also, quite interestingly, after the Second World War, bred together with a guy called Heino Messerschmidt, the Gelbvieh, that's a breed from the south of Germany. And if you want to know a bit more about him, like I said, his book, Man Must Measure, but also the book of Gold Fry, Reproduction and Animal Health. And there's also a book from Australia called Classic Livestock Management Services.